Um, what we're going to be doing today is really, I guess, discussing the impact on returning to the office, whatever that means, because office means a number of different things to people these days. For those that haven't been on any of our previous calls, I think most of you have by now, what I will be doing is recording it so that we can share it with those people who are unable to attend but registered for the call. And if you have questions, which I hope you will have lots of, please take the opportunity to use the chat box at the bottom, Tessa, and we'll then get to those questions. I think probably Liz will probably be talking sort of 35, 40 minutes, but she's quite happy for us to take questions at the end. So we built this as returning to the office. What do we need to think about? How we wish to organise ourselves, our teams, our people, and ourselves as leaders? And also, to what extent has this dramatic pause provided a unique opportunity to create stronger working relationships, both with people who we engage and employ, and also all of our customers. Liz has an 18-year agency experience in senior roles with SMG, Grey, London, and most recently at RGA. She's a fellow of the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising for her contribution to the People Agenda and chair of the People Management Group 8 years. She's a coach, supervisor, and a qualified creative facilitator, founder of Back to Business Ship program, supporting return parents, and led to an agency in the Sunday Times 100 list 3 times. That's fantastic. Her passion is connecting people, work, and creativity. She's a very practical lady, but she's very much a considered inspirational leader herself and very in touch with people. And I guess of all the things that we're all experiencing at the moment, the most important thing is people. And she is also an advisor to the advertising industry more generally. So we now have 15 people, and with more in the waiting room to come. Liz, is it okay if I hand over the controls to you, as it were?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to be here. Thank you, Stephen, for inviting me. And I must do a shout out for Tessa, who I've not seen for 100 years. So really lovely to see you this morning, Tessa. Great. Well, it's great to be with you all. To get started, I quite like to do a one-word check-in, and it's a little practice I've been doing for quite some time now. And is even more important, I think, in these times, because it allows us to kind of notice and normalize what's going on for us right now. As you're all going in back-to-back meetings, flying around from one Zoom call to another with a quick trip to the kitchen and the toilet, what is going on with you right now as you arrive into this space together for the next, 55 minutes or so? So if you've got a pen or a piece of paper or want to put in the chat box, holding up one word to describe how you're arriving this morning. And I'm going to reference this as we go through our little chat together. So in the chat box, or holding it up on a bit of paper, one word, how are you right now? Lovely. Tired. Harassed. Yeah. Stifled. Lovely. Busy. Distracted. Uncertain. Anybody else? No right or wrong, just checking in with yourself, which we don't do too often. Great. Okay, that's lovely. Just gives us a chance to name and to normalize and to arrive, and can be a very powerful thing to do for not just you, but also for your team members as well. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to flip in and out of my screen a bit. I don't want to be doing a big broadcast. So I'll make a few points and then we can come back together and you can comment as you wish. So I deliberately picked this image this morning of a bunch of jigsaw puzzles. Can everybody see all the jigsaw pieces? And deliberately picked a picture. You probably know that the brain can process pictures 60,000 times faster than words. And for me, I'm quite curious around what picture are we creating with all of our bits of jigsaw puzzle going forward. Whoops, don't know what's happened here. Hang on. Sorry, I've just got a problem with my deck. Here we go. Sorry about this. So to help us kind of slice down a very big elephant, with obviously not harming an elephant in the process, I've created a little bit of a framework stolen from John Adair, action-centered leadership back in the 70s and 80s, which I think is quite a helpful way of looking at this. in terms of what are the needs of the task, what are the needs of the team, and what are the needs of the individual, because all three parts are really, really important. And just noticing for you, what draws your attention? Are you drawn more to the task? Are you drawn more to concern about the team? Are you drawn more to concern about the individual? And offering this as a framework, not necessarily to be achieving balance, but to be achieving where are we paying attention and what do we need to be paying attention to. So what's your natural place? What's your natural go-to place? And what might you do in order to be responding to that? So all three areas matter. One area is no more important than the other. All three areas matter. I'm going to go through in our session together, just covering some of those off today. So our brain loves a task. Give us a problem, we like to find a solution. The brain likes to respond to a question. So in some respects, the task is kind of the thing we can kind of get a hold of. We can put a bit of a plan around. We can take some advice. We can have a chat with our cleaning contractors. We can pay attention to our water coolers. I'm sure many of you are starting to think about your office space and your desk layout. And when I pulled this picture out, probably about 8 weeks ago now, it just seemed really strange looking at people sitting in that kind of environment. Thinking about how people are going to move around the building, how are you going to use the lifts, what kind of signage do you need? Those of you with canteens, I'm sure most of you are cashless these days, but how's the seating going to work? How's all that going to work? And thinking about our people who are currently working at home. You know, most of us probably on this call are quite fortunate in that we've probably got a spare bedroom, or I'm sitting down in my basement. If I'm in a flat share and I'm a designer and I've got 2 or 3 screens and my flatmates are also arguing over who's using the dining table, that's not a great place to be right now. And thinking about our backs and our posture, you know, it's okay being at home 1 day a week, 2 days a week, but permanently sitting at the dining table is taking its effect on my back. What sort of home assessments are we doing? How well equipped are our people for being properly set up at home? And if needs be, can we ship out the office chairs to people who are struggling perched on a dining room bench? What does our COVID-19 sickness policy look like? There's a huge amount of work in here for your HR community, for those of you in businesses, and thinking about who authorises someone coming back to work. What happens with someone who's pregnant? What happens with someone with asthma? What happens with all the people who are in the high category of high risk? Thinking about our new health and safety routines. I spoke to a colleague in Singapore a few weeks ago and said, tell me, what have you done with your people in the office? And he literally said that they're ringing a bell every hour on the hour to get, a bit like Pavlov's dogs, for those of us who remember our psychology, to go and wash their hands. Do we want to do that? What happens if I don't wash my hands every hour on the hour? What are you going to do with me? Are you going to start disciplining me? What happens? So who needs to be trained in what from a health and safety point of view? If you've got mental health first aiders, let's get them refreshed, revisited. If you haven't got them in place, you might want to start thinking about getting them in place. I'm also very curious around the supervision aspect of mental health first aiders, because they're going to be dealing with an awful lot of mental health as our people start to gradually regroup and come back into an office space together. So who's supporting the mental health first aider whilst they're supporting everybody else? And the same probably is also true of our HR community. They're doing an awful lot of ringing round people from what I'm hearing on the calls that I'm on, and who's supporting them with the matters that they're having to provide advice on. If you've got an employee assistance program, brilliant. I'm sure that there are other things that they can probably do to support you as well, with additional webinars, etc. But I suppose what I'm also interested in coming out of this crisis for me is a bigger existential question, which I'm sure many of you are also beginning to think about, is what is the purpose of an office? What do we need an office for? What work needs to be done in an office? What work no longer needs to be done in an office? How big does the office actually need to be? And what kind of work are we going to be doing there? So you may want to have a little look at your lease and rethink the purpose of what the work is actually all about. So those are a few things. There's a whole load of advice I'm sure you can get from people far more exhausted than that. And I'm sure that many of you have started to think about some of those task things, because we're trying to deal, I think, in 2 time zones. We're trying to deal with what we know today, and we're also trying to plan for the stuff that we just don't know. And there's an awful lot of not knowing at the moment. So we're trying to deal with here and now, and we're trying to do budget forecasts, and we're trying to predict the future, and we're trying to mobilize people back into an office. There's an awful lot going on. Which takes me on to this slide. For many of you, I'm sure you've heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was very famous in the world of bereavement counselling and created a change curve, which has been referred to extensively over the years around change management. This is an updated chart, which I got from the Think School of Creative Leadership in Amsterdam. And it was updated on the back of the earthquake that took place in Christchurch, and I think works rather well for the situation that we find ourselves in today. So if we start on the left-hand side of the chart, we've got a little red diagram there, the disaster. Obviously, in the case of the earthquake, it was the earthquake. In our case, it's the virus. And what happened, if we go back all those weeks ago, there was quite a lot of denial going on. Oh, it's in China, it's not coming here, it's only old people, lots of people die every year, it can't be that bad. And then suddenly lockdown. Boris came on the television, we all packed our bags, we all fled London, all the cities, all the places we were working in, and we all went home, and we all got a little bit disorientated about what on earth is going on. Many of us leapt into heroism at that point. Lots of people volunteering to be Asda delivery drivers, collecting prescriptions, doing things to help people, rescuing the situation. I leapt in and thought I could be a coach to NHS doctors, and then realised perhaps that wasn't the best thing for me to be doing. But we saw a nation leaping to heroism. We then got into a little bit of a honeymoon. The weather got a little bit better. It was actually quite nice not commuting. It might have been quite nice for a bit being at home with the children all the time, or whatever you were doing. And we got into a period of optimism, gratitude, and altruism. Our Instagram feeds were full of blossom, full of ducks, full of ducklings, full of trees, full of nature. And we got into a place of feeling grateful. We then, I would say probably about 5-6 weeks ago, there was an awful lot of fatigue and stress in the system. The average daily working day has increased by 3 hours a day. People are getting really tired. We've had that this morning. That was one of the beauties of the check-in. There's a lot of different emotion arriving in the system at any one moment in time. We got into some blaming. Where's the PPE? What were we doing with the NHS? What do we think we're all doing? Rage, sadness, pain, and grief. And I use sadness, pain, and grief in its broadest sense because life, unfortunately, is still going on and people continue to die from conditions other than COVID-19. There's also sadness, pain, and grief for people who've had their university lives cut short, people who've lost their jobs, people who've lost their loved ones. A lot of pain, a lot of loss, a lot of bereavement actually in the system. So we end up in this bottom bit of sitting in a period of disillusionment and then starting to wonder how we start to reconstruct. How do we start to move on? How do we start to come out of this crisis? What's now possible? How can we integrate? How can we move on? So the purpose for showing you this slide really is with a message of meeting people where they are. Because as we saw in our very quick one-word check-in this morning, we can be anywhere on this. We can be exhausted and tired. We can be hopeful and optimistic. We can be positive. And I can chat myself probably up and down this slide in about 5 seconds. And my emotion and mood will change from moment to moment. So another little picture just to share with you, people that we're all in the same boat. I'm not sure, well, we're definitely not all in the same boat. I'm certainly not sure that we're in the same storm. And the reason for saying that is if we look at those little boats in that picture there, I would say that my little boat is that little yellow canoe boat at the bottom. I'm self-isolating on my own, paddling my own canoe, quite literally. There are boats there with bigger sails, boats there with motors, different boats, different sizes, but they're all hitting the waves at different points in different places in that storm. So if I'm an NHS doctor, my boat, my wave and my storm is very different to me sitting here in sunny St Albans. So the reason for going through all of this with you is when we start to think about the people start to become a complicated part of that jigsaw puzzle, because we're not all having the same experience. Some people I'm meeting now have become quite literally agoraphobic. People are fearful. There are going to be a number of mental health issues arriving into the workplace because of the trauma that some people have been going through. For some people, this is a period of pausing and optimism and opportunity. For some people, this experience has been absolutely terrible. And we need to be very mindful of that when our people start to return to the workplace. So thinking, just going back to John Adair then, we've done a little bit on the task, a little bit now on the team. One of my great phrases at the moment is everyone is right, only partially. Everyone is right, only partially. So we're entering, from my perspective, a period of deep democracy. And I saw a Harvard Business Review article briefly on LinkedIn this morning saying it's not about policy, it's about people. And I think we're entering a period of time where we really need to be talking to our people about what do they want and what do they need to be as a team going forward. So looking at the opportunities from this crisis, what is now possible for our teams that wasn't possible before the end of March? There's an opportunity to rebuild a team. What are the characteristics that we want in our team now? What is the learning that we have been experiencing as we've been navigating this storm together around how do we want to be together? There's an awful lot more talk now, I'm sure you're seeing it in your own LinkedIn feeds, around resilience and vulnerability and humility and kindness, and lots of words which as an HR person I've tried to get people to pay attention to for many years, but haven't necessarily been a business imperative. As we start to bring our people together, these characteristics are super, super important. And by listening to all the voices in the system, we can start to rebuild, repair, and recreate, I believe, something probably much better than what we had before. So sticking with the opportunity that this situation provides. Who will do what and when, how are we going to hold each other to account, and designing what I would call a team alliance, something taken from the organisational relationship systems coaching, that's a bit of a mouthful, whereby if you think about it, we have employment contracts, but we don't actually contract around how we're going to behave and work with each other. And I think there is a great opportunity now to be contracting around how do we want to work? How can we get the best out of each other? I also think that we're moving to a hybrid team scenario. And by that, I mean, not everybody is going to be in the office at the same time for quite a while. I would imagine that there are a number of people who are probably saying, well, I don't want to pay £20 a day to come into the office. Thank you very much. I can manage some of my work at home now. So how do we manage a hybrid team? How do we manage a blended team, if that's a better word for you to work with? And how can we be supporting our line managers to be getting the best out of that new management style and that new way of managing teams? I also believe that we're moving into a space and a place of people-centric cultures. And it's really super important that we hear what those voices are to be creating inclusive, collaborative, and co-created workspaces going forward to be getting the best out of people. It was also a bit weird when I selected the train picture, the underground picture. It's like, whoa, we used to lead our lives like that. I'm not sure I want to get back into an underground station particularly. My suggestion here is life is not an either or, it's an and, which takes us back to that blended hybrid piece. And what I'm noticing, and you're probably noticing in your conversations, is that there is a group of people, my son, one of my sons who's 24, can't wait to get back to work. He's missing that social aspect. He really, really wants to be back in community, back in connection, back in the workplace. There are other people who've, as we've mentioned, have got health issues, anxious now about being back at work, not too sure what that looks like, don't know why they're going to put themselves through the daily grind in the picture on the right. So how can we get the best of both and meet everybody's needs? Just wanted to quickly show you a piece around managing change that might be quite helpful again when we're thinking about people coming back. Where are people's heads in relation to the next wave of change? And the next wave of change is, oh, lockdown's easing, we're all going to start going back. And that's another big piece of change for people to deal with. So in this rather busy picture, if we look at, we sort of got a little triangle there that sort of represents a bit of a mountain, if you like, called the edge. So we've got a bit of an edge. We're about to enter another edge. And I think we should all acknowledge and congratulate ourselves for how far we have come since the end of March. But we're about to go into another edge or cross over another edge. And it's suggested in this diagram that there are 3 responses to change. The first group are the leapers. That great phrase of look before you leap. Leapers like to get into action. They like to get moving. They've got energy. They're fast. They're impatient. Or probably the first people to be, you know, getting the hand sanitizers and sorting out the face masks. They're in it and they're moving. But they can get bored if it goes too slowly for them. And they can move a bit too fast. Our bridge builders also are open for change, but they like a little bit more information. They probably wanted to know what the data was before they started making decisions as to which face mask they'd buy. They want the analysis, they want the research, they want to listen. And then they will start to put the process and the procedure in place to literally help build that bridge from where we are now to where we need to get to. The third group of people are the tradition holders. And these are the people probably who've got the information in the organisation that no one's ever written down. So they have an awful lot of wisdom and knowledge around the organisation in which they operate in, but they want to kind of keep hold of what used to work. So if it isn't broken, you know, don't fix it. They will move, they will change, but they will take some time. And it's the bridge builders typically who will be negotiating and mediating between the leapers and the tradition holders. And it's also worth just pointing out that all of us are all 3. All of us have all 3 of these responses to change, depending on what it is that we're being asked to change from and to. So just thinking then about, for you just to reflect looking at that, what is your response to change? What has been your response thus far? And for those of you who, I was speaking to a CEO the other day who said, oh, I love change. I can't get enough of it. Well, that's great, but not everybody has that response to it. So just asking you to notice, what is your response? You may be thinking about people you know and going, oh, wow, yeah, that's them. That's what they do in change. And my invitation as leaders is to be pacing and leading. Pacing and leading as we sort of, metaphorically hold hands to cross over this edge together. What is it that people need to feel comfortable to be dealing with the change? I also thought this was interesting to share with you as well, a bit of research and further context from 2015. Naomi Klein at the bottom of this busy slide says things haven't got any worse. The system is revealing itself. And 72% of leaders admitted that their organisation was reliant on fading revenue streams in 2015. And 58% of teams were failing to lead for innovation. And 28% of leaders believed their current business model wasn't sustainable anymore. And 75% of organisations were struggling with overwhelmed employees. That's 5 years ago. So when we start thinking about what we're actually dealing with as leaders, HR professionals, marketeers, whatever our roles are in organisations, things weren't great 5 years ago. So we're in an even hotter spot, I would suggest, than where we were then. So turning to us as leaders, and for those of you leading businesses or leadership positions, or if you're not managing teams or businesses and groups of people, thinking about leading yourself. How have you been leading yourself in this time? And again, focusing on the opportunity of this crisis to think about what myths have we broken? What has a sense of a pause given us? And we've broken a lot of myths, haven't we? The fact we're all sitting on this call in the way we are this morning, the fact we're all not traveling around, the fact we're all zooming in around the world, the fact people are working from home. What myths have we broken? And what I'm curious about is what more myths are we actually now able to break? Because we've broken up a lot of rules, haven't we? All the bets are off now. The rule book's been broken up. Who do you want to be as a leader? What have you been noticing about yourself as a leader as you've gone through this period? Perhaps you've been thinking about what you value. What are your values now? Perhaps they've come into sharper relief for you in the last 12, 13 weeks. What do you need? What have you been learning? You know, you've probably been attending lots of webinars like this morning. I've been in the London Business School quite a lot. I've been learning quite a lot of stuff in the last few months. And what more would you like to explore? What more do you want to know more about? And how can you start developing this inclusive and collaborative leadership? How can you start thinking about your response to change and thinking about what other people may be needing from you for them to be able to make that change? What's the greatest possible organisation that you could be creating now? What could you be known for? Could you be known for being the organisation that never ever turns down a flexible working request ever again? What's the greatest possible outcome for you? And also being mindful of our customers and our suppliers. How might we be partnering with them better to be creating the greatest possible outcome for all of us out of this tragic situation? For me, the tragedy would be to come out of this and to not actually have changed anything at all. That would be terrible, I think. So let's really seize that opportunity. What I'm also thinking about is, I totally appreciate there is a here and now for a business, as well as trying to plan for what the future opportunity might be. So is there a way of you splitting your leadership team, your board team, whereby 2 or 3 of you are focused on the here and now that needs to be delivered, and then to be thinking with 2 or 3, however big your board is, as to who could be future focused? So how can we divide and conquer the future and the present and put effort in both of those to be keeping an eye on the bigger prize, the greatest possible outcome here? The other thing I would just like to reference, and it's quite interesting that we're in such a dynamic learning situation right now. I was on a call yesterday about retaining diversity and inclusivity on the agenda. And as an HR person who's been a pioneer in this space for quite some time now, there is a lot of concern amongst my community that the inevitable restructures that will be taking place, which is a polite word of talking about redundancies, is a risky place in terms of what our approach is going to be around diversity and inclusivity. So thinking about our restructure process, thinking about our redundancy process, at what point in that process, or at what points, plural, in that process, is there the opportunity for bias to creep in? And how can we be making sure that we are removing bias, checking for bias, questioning that bias, to make sure that we do not decimate all the hard work and all the important work and all the valuable work that has been done around diversity and inclusivity over the years. I'm sure that many of you saw the piece by Mark Ritson that's going around on LinkedIn at the moment around 2 sports brands, and basically saying, you know, who's on your board? It's all very well saying things, but what are you actually doing? And what does your brand look like, and who's on your board representing your brand, and therefore paying even more attention to the split of our diversity and inclusivity going forward. And I would also suggest the same applies with our recruitment policies. We need to get much, much sharper around all of this, because it's just not acceptable anymore. So again, just going back to the leadership bit, then again, thinking about your language, and again, thinking about this in terms of your strategies, in terms of your branding, in terms of how you're speaking to your customers, in terms of how you're speaking to your people. An invitation to move from rallying language to soothing language. So you rally people who are willing to follow you. You don't convince people to follow you by rallying them. And without getting too political, I'm sure if we look at the leadership across in America, we have seen an awful lot of rallying going on. There's a lot of battling, there's a lot of revolution, there's a lot of winning, disrupting, fighting, surviving. Yeah, we're going to get it, we're going to kill it by Easter. Our people need soothing. To be creating these inclusive, collaborative workspaces, we need to be talking about together. We need to be talking about everyone, trust, we, us, feel, collaborate. By soothing people, that is how we convince people to follow us. So thinking about where in your communications is humility. How are you demonstrating your humility? What language are you using? How are you representing yourself? How are you speaking to your people? Another quote of mine here is, calm seas do not make for a skilled mariner. So if we go back to our boat analogy at the beginning, all those boats being rocked around, actually there is learning to be had in all of this. So as leaders, it's okay to say, I don't know. As I said at the beginning, all the bets are off, the rule books have been ripped up. So as a leader, by being honest and vulnerable in that, I don't know. But how might we move closer to knowing together? I may not have liked the Brexit decision. What will it take for you to come with us? How might we partner, collaborate, share our wisdom, listen to the voices in the system, and move closer to knowing together? And as a leader, the invitation is to be making space for others to be contributing, for others to participate on calls like this. How much airtime are you taking up? How can you give space and voice to other people? Check in with yourself. Are you being inclusive? How much are you delegating? How much are you making space for others to contribute? And something you could do today is to ask your team, where do I need to get out of your way? Am I in the way? How can I get out of the way? What am I blocking? What am I stopping from happening? If I just stepped over to the left a bit, what more could emerge from this situation? And inviting you to look at your language around soothing and not rallying. So yeah, this sense of emergence. So for those of you who may have come across the work of William Bridges, a very famous book called Transitions, we're going through a period of an ending. An ending has happened. You know, life as we knew it isn't necessarily going to be life as we have it going forward. So as we move from an ending to a beginning, there is a suggestion that we sit in this fertile void, this space of transition, the bottom of the U, as Otto Scharmer would refer to it. So as we sit there, sit in the mud, there is an opportunity to really be reflecting around what wants to emerge for you, for your people, for your business, what collaborations are possible with your clients, what whispers as you're going off on your walks or getting a few quiet moments with a cup of tea, what are the whispers that are beginning to make a little noise in your ears that are wanting some attention to allow to emerge, to come forward? And then just finishing off, I think a powerful quote, I'm sure probably many of you have seen this before, from Peter Drucker, Austrian sociologist, management leadership guru. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic. And my invitation for you as you go through the week and the coming weeks is to check in with yourself and to think, Am I responding to this with yesterday's logic? Or is there actually something new and something different that is wanting to emerge that I need to pay attention to? So a little quick whistle-stop tour around John Adair's lovely framework of task, team, individual. We've had a little look at the task, had a little look at the complicated piece around people, and an important piece around supporting yourselves as leaders, checking in with yourselves as leaders, and allowing the greatest possible outcome to emerge for all of us so that we're not acting with yesterday's logic. Thank you.
Liz, thank you very, very much indeed. Wow, you've given us a rather huge amount to think about, particularly for obviously agency leaders and people running businesses that are, like most of our businesses in communications and marketing, people driven. Over the last few weeks, I know you've been speaking to lots of agency leaders, and I'd just be keen to understand what their fears are and concerns, and what sort of feedback you're getting from them.
I think what's on people's agendas now is this whole area of restructures and redundancies. And I think, as you know, the whole issue around furloughing coming to an end. And again, I should have mentioned that in terms of people coming back to the workplace. You know, there are some unhappy, probably angry people coming back. So I think there's a piece around restructures, redundancies, and what is the outcome of that in terms of all those little jigsaw pieces, because leaders have got to stand up at the end of the day and say, you know, these are the 5, 10, 20, 30 people who've gone, and these are the reasons why, and this is what our organisation now looks like. And I was on a conversation yesterday to say, rather than doing salami slicing, which is what people typically tend to do, they sort of cut around the edges. I think my suggestion would be to start with the end in mind. What is the business we're trying to create? What do our clients need from us? How many people do I need to structure this client, to support this client or this client, and build it up from a business point of view, rather than chopping off the tallest poppies and hoping that that's going to give us something different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. I suppose one of obviously the biggest challenges people face at the moment is really having an expectation and understanding of what their clients now want in this new environment. Because same point you made earlier on about the fact that structures and processes and the way in which we organise ourselves will have to evolve. Clients obviously going through that same process themselves. And in many instances, they don't know themselves what the likely outcome is in terms of what their needs and requirements are. But to be able to anticipate that and structure your own business accordingly, it makes it doubly difficult. Yeah.
Yes, it does. I'm not sitting here for a moment saying it's easy at all. I think it's that partnership piece. I think it provides an opportunity to have a different kind of a conversation. Whereas sometimes, you know, you're expected as the agency or the partner to have the greater wisdom, perhaps this opportunity to be partnering and collaborating and say, right, let's just get together because we don't know. So how can we create something together and to have that collaborative conversation?
Yeah, that does make sense. And the last question I've got, and I'll shut up and then hand over to the rest of the group, is really relating to the concept of the fact that if we're going through a restructure, and if it's likely that some of the people on this call will have to basically restructure their businesses and lose some long-term colleagues and friends. Ordinarily, when you do that in an environment when you're actually working in an office, there's that period of unsettlement, and then you go through that reorganisation. But you've got the opportunity, because you can come together in an environment, to rebuild the culture and rebuild, the structure of the business going forward, and try and close that gap, which inevitably happens in any reorganisation. With people working remotely and from home, and some people, going back into the office, that rebuilding process is going to be doubly difficult. Yeah. Particularly if we do see a second wave. So you've got the challenges of that to cope with. Then got actually, how do I bring the team together again, having had to make this restructure? Do you have sort of advice around that?
Yeah, and I think there's another bit there as well to the unfortunate people who may be placed at risk of redundancy. They're going to be sitting at home. And for some people, work has probably been a refuge with all of the, domestic abuse going on. So actually now telling me I can't come back to the office gives an added complexity as well. So I think shoring up all the support around the people making the decisions and the people receiving those decisions or those proposals, I think is super important. So, the HR team, the managers, the employee assistant program, the mental health workers, for those of you in the advertising world, the support of NABs, I think really pay attention to the support as to how you're going to manage all of that. I think I come back to this area, so rebuilding teams, I think I come back to what I was talking about before around listening to the voices in the system and listening to what people need, what the people need and what the system needs, what the organisation needs, and allowing people to have a voice in the shaping of that. I think we're almost into sort of bespoke conversations with people around what works, because different things are now working for different people for different reasons, and listening to that. It may not be that we can give everybody everything that they're asking for, but at least by including people in that conversation. So this whole business around, if we're just rallying and leading and we're not looking behind us, then I think things are going to start to go badly wrong. So this soothing, making time, talking, paying attention, respecting which boat people have been in, respecting which storm people are still in, and really demonstrating empathy with people. And the trust point that someone has raised in the chat there is really, really important. So I think pace and lead rather than rally and hurrah, let's all get on the horses and charge. We need to do it with great care.
Yeah, I think it was Greg who raised that point. And Greg, I'll just unmute you if I may. Hang on, it's not unmuting. Whoops. Greg, can you unmute yourself? Sorry, for some reason it won't let me do it.
There we go. I have to say, from my perspective, a huge factor has been running into this and now coming out of it as well is trust, that of trust. And, the soothing, the change to soothing actually really plays into that, because if someone's constantly rallying and pushing forwards in the great hurrah, then the trust begins to wear thin when you see things around are not necessarily crumbling but struggling an awful lot, and yet the leadership is still sort of waving the banner saying follow me, follow me, follow me. Then trust becomes a question. But I think on more of a micro level, organizations have always been, not always, have tended to be reticent to trust people to work from home. And now they've been forced into that situation, and suddenly realizing that people not only can but do work well from home seems to be an element of enforced trust. You're having to believe that people will do things now that before you might have questioned, and actually probably erred on the side of disbelief. So I don't know what anybody else thinks about that, but I find it very interesting that trust for me has reared its head many times.
Yeah. I would completely agree with you. I think trust is super important, and what we say to people and how we say to people, I think is a super critical crucible point at the moment, because how we treat people now and how we interact with people now is going to determine whether they want to stay or not.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the great is, having battled for many years around, women returning from maternity, no, they can't possibly, no, that's never going to work. The client won't want that. There's no way they're going to do that. They won't want them working 3 days a week. Suddenly, pack your suitcase, leave. And hey, it's not great for everybody by any means. And we've got to be careful sometimes talking about this, because it's not working very well at all for some people. But it is working. Businesses haven't collapsed on the back of people working from home. So it does work. So yes, so what else can we trust? So to your point, if trust is really important, and we've now demonstrated and surprised ourselves by trusting the fact you're working and you're not in Marks and Spencer's shopping, what else is now possible? What else can we surprise ourselves with? And why do we need to go into an office 5 days a week?
I think,
to do what? To do what?
Yeah. perhaps comes back to your earlier point, Liz, and I think it's about where you are in terms of your life stage to a certain extent. Like you, I've got a young son, he's 27 years old, and he's desperate to get back into the office. And one of our colleagues from Pimento a couple of weeks ago, Susie Moore, mentioned on the call, and I think it was quite a profound statement. She said, you know, home is where you work, work is where you have fun. And that sense of coming together for social interaction and the need to be able to actually engage with other people and reflect and also it's about, you know, understanding where you are, I guess, in that world is important. But I do think, therefore, we could see an odd model where we have people who are clearly either needing to go back to work because they're in environments at home which are unhealthy, or they need to go back to work because they're learning and they're young and they need that social engagement, so they need to go back to work. And then you're going to have people who are perhaps more mature in management roles, they're living out in the shires, they're reluctant to want to get on the trains, reluctant to go back on the underground, reluctant to go back into the office. Essentially will be forced to, in order to do the right thing by the people who they employ. That's going to be a very, very difficult thing. Particularly, and it's really important that they don't resent that fact, because they have an obligation and a requirement to look after and nurture all the people who work with them, regardless of their own particular ways in which they want to work. And having that flexibility is, I think, for some businesses, it's not going to be possible.
Yeah. And perhaps, you know, it's going to go through a period of transition. You know, perhaps it might be, you know, X% are back initially, and then it's a gradual movement again. I think it's moving so much that it may be, you know, that for the sake of the conversation, it may be the 24, the 27-year-olds who want to be back, and then the people in the shires less reticent, and people like me wanting more evidence around data of safety of viruses. And it's a gradual wave, you know, going back to our curve I showed you at the beginning, perhaps there's a gradual wave of people beginning to move gradually back. Yeah, I just think care is what's needed.
I agree. Tessa, I think you got a question.
Yeah, Liz, great to see you again, by the way. Fantastic and really interesting stuff. I was struck by the point you made about, I can't remember who it was, about applying yesterday's logic to today's challenges. And I wondered, when you were talking about organisations inevitably going to be having redundancies and cutting their costs, whether you think, or whether indeed you're aware, that they might be thinking differently about reforming these teams. Because the conventional thinking has always been to axe all your consultants and external agencies, bring everything in-house, and just plow on, and then gradually that in-house team becomes overloaded, can't do it, and they creep back in again. But this has demonstrated, I think, that actually working with remote teams and teams of people who are perhaps contributing in different ways, you know, I mean, we're all working remotely, we're all on Zoom, and actually there might be ways to introduce sort of more skill and experience, but use different models. So what is your thought about this? Do you think that it will follow the same pattern largely of just retrench in-house, and it's going to be actually very difficult for external agencies or independent practitioners, like many of us are, to kind of engage with those clients? Or do you think, and are you hearing, that there might be a slightly different attitude to rebuilding and you know, kind of scaling back after this? You know, there's a better way to do it than just knuckle down to 3 or 4 of your cheapest people, basically.
Gosh, that's a big question, isn't it? I think, what do I think? From an HR point of view, I think there's going to be quite a lot of work for all the reason that we've been talking about in terms of people. I was speaking to some people yesterday who were, for example, talking about, let's, for the sake of a conversation, talking about events, for example. There probably aren't very many events going to be happening in the next, you know, however long, 3 months, 6 months, whatever. So that could be, as an example, that could be something that you don't need anymore at the moment, but you might need back in 6, 9, 12 months time when that bit then starts to pick back up again. So I can kind of see a retrenching to the core of what are we being paid to do and what's here and now and what do we need to address. And then I would like to think that as the waves then of recovery start to happen, that then they'll start to either build those people back in, or they'll be probably cautiously, I would suggest, be using external people because they then don't have the liability of taking those people in-house. So actually the consultant piece could play quite well, because there'll probably be some anxiety around, well, we don't want to keep going through restructures, so we'll keep a core of what we know we're paid for and we know we need to do, and run the, I guess it's hub and spoke idea, isn't it? And then bring in the expertise as we need to rebuild. So I'm a great optimism around the reparation part of this. I think there'll be a shrinking, but then I have to believe that we're going to be emerging. So does that answer your question? So
yeah, it was really more about whether the rebuilding might be in a different way.
Yeah, well, this is my...
Given that core teams are working remotely, you know, we're all working in new ways.
Yeah, and so when I'm speaking to people, exactly what I'm saying here this morning, you know, can we not just salami slice people around the edges, but really look at what is this business doing, where is it going, what does it need, what does it need right now, and therefore what models does it need, in terms of not only in terms of structure, but also in terms of how we're managing these people, as I was mentioning, you know, blended teams, hybrid teams, what expertise do we need in-house, what expertise do we still need to continue to buy? Because I think we're at a crucible point again as to what we are building now is super critical for its what's the word, robustness going forward. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, as it was the start of a conversation yesterday, I think there's probably going to be a workshop on it actually, around how to look at all of this in a different way. Yeah, thank you for raising the question, and lovely to see you.
You too.
Okay, everyone. Any more for any more, or
Yeah, can I ask a second? Sorry.
go on then.
Before we go on. And that is a question that I think is probably close to all our hearts at the moment, which is, do you have any tips as to how to bond or better engage, whether it's a new client or a new team, basically a new bunch of colleagues, when you have to do the whole thing on Zoom? You know, I mean, it's a new experience for many of us. I think we've all done some Zoom calls, but suddenly, you know, we're finding you have to build the entire relationship, not just with one person, but across a team on Zoom. And there's, you know, there have been no meetings, which is quite challenging. I mean, I've certainly been finding it quite challenging because, you know, I've only ever used Zooms to fill in the gaps between the meeting and the relationship is there. Now the relationship is on Zoom. So that's quite challenging. Any thoughts on that one, or suggestions or tips, please?
I wonder whether I mean, I'd be interested in the other people on the call, but my suggestion would be perhaps to think about that working alliance. How do we want to be together? What kind of relationship do we want to have together? Yeah, what you know, we're all on Zoom. What do you need? Well, actually, Tessa, I'd just like to speak to you on the telephone. I don't want a Zoom call with you on Friday, as much as I like looking at you. A phone call will do me, you know.
Yeah.
So I think asking people, I think for me, it comes to less presentation, more conversation, and how can we get more conversational and more human in the constraints that we've got. So not turning up with the 85-page onboarding deck, which I know that you won't do, but turning that into more of a human conversation about what people need. You know, back in the day, you know, don't call you at 4 o'clock in the car because you're at the swimming lessons or whatever it might be. Though there are still those moments in our clients' lives, aren't they, when it's a good and a bad time to be contacting people. So really getting to know our clients, as I know that you do, as being people, and what works and what they need. I'll be interested to know what other people have done around this. But yeah, and just being mindful of time. I'm also hearing people saying, oh, well, I couldn't make the call at 5, but the call's gone in for 7:30. What? How did that happen? So working out a client working alliance. What do we all need in this relationship? What do you need from me, rather than assuming what you need? What would be helpful for you? Because they're having a tough time too. They're human beings in their boats, aren't they? So which boat are they in? You know, you may even want to take that change curve and just say, hey, let's just all have a chat about which boat we're in right now and how can we help each other.
Yeah, I totally concur with that. And you said earlier on in the beginning of the call that actually on average people are saying they're working 3 hours longer. Mediums like this are very, very tiring. And I think actually having a mixed channel of communication that actually puts the person you're communicating to first. And I know a lot of people, for example, today, you know, aren't sharing cameras and stuff like that. And why should they? They're probably sitting there in pajamas and engaging with this conversation, but they're here. So you just have to, as always, we'll all know with our relationships with our clients, which one responds to text, which one responds to LinkedIn messages, which one actually responds to picking up the telephone, which one doesn't respond at all. And it's just being flexible enough to accommodate their communication needs within your own repertoire. And, you know, all of us probably are having to communicate across multiple platforms on a daily basis. You change it up accordingly.
Yep.
But thank you once again for spending time with us, Liz.
Thank you.
People this morning, really enjoyed it. I don't know whether you can share your charts with us. I'd like to be able to share certainly the video with those people that were unable to make it. But I would like to thank you on behalf of the whole group. And it was great to have you on again. And we look forward to seeing you very soon.
Okay.
And no doubt in 3 or 4 weeks' time, the whole world would have changed again.
Yeah. Well, this deck keeps being updated virtually every 4 days. It's quite extraordinary. So yes, but it's been a pleasure being with you all, and thank you for your questions. There's also some interesting comments in the chat there. Annabelle's sent a thing around sending something to clients and the leadership pause. Lovely. Yeah, well, by all means, connect with me on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat, connect, Zoom, text, speak, whatever. So yeah.
And Liz, what I'll do is I'll publish your email address, if that's okay, on the follow-up, so everybody can actually do just that.
Yeah, go well, go gently, go optimal, not perfection, is my other phrase at the moment. We're all doing our best in our boats, in our storms.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.